Well, I think you have to put it in context. I think the people behind BDS have the same goals as those who are trying to destroy the Jewish state always have. If you look at 1948, when Israel re-established Jewish sovereignty in its ancestral homeland, and I use the term re-establish very strongly, there were 5 armies that tried to extinguish us militarily, and they tried again in 56 and 67 and 73. And today, if we look at Israel, we see that there are no formal military capabilities that are able to extinguish us. We are a very powerful army. We are able to look after ourselves by ourselves. We've never asked any foreign governments ever to bring troops to this territory and fight our battles for us. So our enemies tried something else. They tried economic boycotts, and soon after the re-establishment of Israel, the Arab League, which is all the Arab countries together in one body, established an economic boycott, saying none of member states or people, citizens of member states, can have any connection economically with Israel, the Jewish state, and that didn't work. So they added a secondary layer where they wouldn't do business with any countries which did business, or any entities which did business with Israel, and that didn't work. So they added a third level, a tertiary boycott, where they basically said to companies, if you do business with anyone who does business with Israel, we will cease our activities with you. And it became a very difficult time for Israel. I mean, this was before my time, but only one car company would sell to Israel. The supermarkets were bare with only one local product. No one would sell, no one would do any business with Israel. But if we fast forward to 2015, we're now an OECD member, one of the primary economies in the world, and we saw off that threat. So then they tried something else. They invented what is now known throughout the world as terrorism. Terrorism really had its formative years here, and against primarily Israeli and Jewish targets, where they would hijack planes, they would blow up events, they would even murder Olympic athletes, as they did in the 70s. And then through the first Intifada and through the second Intifada, there wasn't a day where they weren't trying to blow up buses, cafes, discotheques, anything and everything. But again, we found a response, and we brought terrorism down to a very low level. It's still too high. Even when one person is murdered, that's too high, but we brought it down. We really, not to say that we won the war on terror, but we're certainly winning the battle. So they tried a new tack, and they decided, let's have the front lines away from Israel. Let's have them on campuses, let's have them in unions, let's have them in the economic sphere outside, in the US, in Europe. And this is perhaps, they try to target our weak underbelly, because it's one thing, we Israelis, we're used to it. We've taken on these attacks and we've defeated our opponents. But it's much harder around the world, because unfortunately most people don't have the ability to suppress this attack. But I believe, just as we did win all these other battles, we will win the information war, because quite simply truth is on our side, and the more the truth shines through, the more people understand that we are the only democracy in the region. We are the only true ally of the US and the West in the region, and I have no doubt that we will win this war as we won all the others, even though it seems pretty difficult at this point. But one thing I would stress is, sometimes we play out the BDS movement and we give them victories they did not earn and they did not deserve, and they like to claim them as victories. But what we've got to understand is BDS at this point, it's a long-term strategic threat, but it hasn't managed to permeate to the point where too many Israeli businesses have lost too much. So what we've got to do is, rather than focus on the negative, we've also got to focus on the positive, and we've got to entice and encourage people to see the good in Israel, to see the real Israel, and encourage them to buy Israeli products and to come and visit, because I do believe that there is no substitute to seeing Israel. You know, we can talk about Hasbara, we can talk about what's happening in the media and how everyone is seeing things through the prism of social media or the mainstream media, but once someone comes to Israel and they see the reality and they see all the information that they've been given, it's just simply not true, or at least completely out of context, then the more people that come here and see that, that is how we'll win it. So I really encourage as many people as possible to come to Israel, to see for themselves. Then they will have the facts and the tools to be able to go back to their home, to their communities, to their student campuses, and tell the truth, and that is how we'll win this war. There's a great quote which I like to use from Salman Rushdie. You know, the award-winning author who wrote about Islam, and he was under a fatwa from the Iranian regime, is under death sentence because he put a critical eye on Islam. And he was once asked, how do you defeat terrorism? And he came up with a brilliant yet simple answer: don't allow yourself to be terrorized. If we don't allow ourselves to be terrorized, they will not win. This is not a war that can defeat us physically. This is psychological warfare. And if we don't allow ourselves to be terrorized, and Israelis don't, I'm in a sense happy but sad that no matter what happens, even the most terrible atrocities which murder tens of people, we get on with our lives. We carry on. We have no other choice. Sometimes if you see terrorist attacks on a street in the morning, by the evening it will become a busy thoroughfare once again. You know, I come from England, and I spent some time in the US, and whenever there was a terrorist attack there, for weeks they will shut down the area. Israelis don't have that luxury. We have to get on with our lives, and I think this is our response, and this is why we are beating terror, and this is why we will beat terror, because Israelis understand we have no other choice. We have a small slither of land given to us. We have nowhere else to go, and quite simply, they cannot chase us out. So we have to get on with our lives. So our singular message to the terrorists: we will not allow ourselves to be terrorized. And I hope the people around the world, when they see what goes on the mainstream media, this is only a very small part of what's going on in Israel, because the real Israel, the Israel that you'll see when you're here, there are less murders per capita in Israel than any other Western country in the world. So safety-wise, you're safer in Jerusalem, you're safer in Tel Aviv than you are in New York, in LA, in London or Paris, factually. And once you're here, you'll realize that this is very familiar to you. This is a Western open society. We have a great country, and really I would just encourage everyone to see it, because once you see it, you realize that a lot of the fears that you may have had from the outside are allayed once you're here and you walk the streets and you see how wonderful this country is. Well, first of all, we have to truly understand what BDS is. BDS is undoubtedly a thoroughly, unequivocally anti-Semitic movement. I just challenge anyone who supports BDS to answer this one question. Is it a coincidence that the only country in the world that is subject to boycott, divestment and sanctions just also happens to be the only Jewish country in the world? Why is it that even their manifesto, it doesn't talk of a general human rights ideology? It doesn't talk about an oppression, you know, let's fight against any country that so-called oppresses its people. I believe that Israel does not oppress any other people. But let's just even take them at their word and say, okay, Israel is as bad as they say. But the fact is, the manifesto, the constitution, the working ideals of the BDS movement are about one singular country in the world. And sometimes you hear these people say, oh, we've got to start somewhere. All those people who say we've got to start somewhere, it's interesting. They've also ended in exactly the same place as they started, with the one Jewish state. And I ask again, the proponents of BDS, is it a coincidence? Because I believe it is not. And if the one Jewish state is the only state in the world that you're targeting, that absolutely fulfills the criteria of historic anti-Semitism. And these people are akin to the fascists and neo-Nazis of the 40s, as they are to the haters of the Jewish people throughout history. It's just sometimes they use different language, they use different tactics. Sometimes, by the way, on campuses there is physical violence. I know of a girl who was woken up in the middle of the night to, at knife point, to physically scrape off with her nails posters that she put up for a falafel night celebrating Israel Independence Day. So those who believe that BDS is a non-violent movement fighting oppression, it's the opposite. It's an oppressive movement that is racist and anti-Semitic in its ideology. And these are just the followers of some of the haters of the Jewish people in history. Sometimes the motives are the same. The Jewish people are accused of being greedy. The Jewish state is accused of being power greedy. The motive of Jewish people with blood in history, that they would kidnap children and use their blood. Today, it's the Palestinian children that are being accused by the Jewish state. So the motives are even the same. You can literally cut and paste all the accusations, the anti-Semitic accusations against the Jewish people, superimpose them on the Jewish state, and this is what you have today. So there is no getting around it. Those who support BDS, that's not to say you can't be critical of Israel. There are many Israelis who are critical of government policy. But when you single one country out and it also just happens to be the only Jewish state in the world, I think they have to become honest with themselves and say this is a racist, an oppressive and anti-Semitic movement. First of all, as I said, I do a lot of speaking. I speak with our opponents as well as proponents, and quite simply, the truth. And sometimes even you just have to show the lack of knowledge on the other side. I've spoken with the most virulent anti-Zionists. Again, I would stress that they're anti-Semites at base. And I just push them back on the lack of their own knowledge. The majority of them only have a soundbite. They have they say Israel is trampling on international law. I question them. What international law exactly are we trampling on? Maybe a very small percent will be able to quote some UN resolution or Geneva Convention, and I tell them exactly where in that resolution is it that Israel. And because Israel is abiding by international law, if you just push them back, they will, sometimes if they're rational people, they will be shown the error of their ways, and then you can open a discussion with them. This works on a one-to-one or one-to-a-few basis, but I really think just getting the truth out, just showing the real Israel, the complex Israel. If we want to see a little America in the Middle East, then there will be many facets, but we face challenges that America simply doesn't. So we're going to have responses that America simply doesn't. I think the most important element of Israel that people miss is that we are a democracy where people believe, if we talk about the Arab Spring, that democracy cannot rise. It's foreign to the Middle East, people say. Well, we've seen that before there was an Arab Spring that became an Islamic winter, the Prime Minister likes to say, there was a Jewish Spring. And the Jewish Spring also came from no bedrock of democracy. If you look at all the people who created, formed, established the state, not one of them had 1 minute of experience of democracy. Either they came from Tsarist or communist Russia, they came from Nazi Germany, they came from the Arab world, which has now become the Arab world, even though the Jews were there before the Arab conquest and the Islamic occupation. None of them had any experience of democracy. In fact, very few of them had experience of any freedoms, yet they were able to build one of the most open and vocal and liberal democracies in the world. And I think that's vitally important also when we discuss what's going on around us. People, you can't impose democracy. No. But the idea that you can't build democracy in the Middle East because there's something foreign here, there's something in the air, the Jews have shown that that's not true.